We'll start with the third text of Walt Whitman, which is When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. It got published in 1865. When Walt Whitman wrote the poem after Abraham Lincoln's assassination by John Wilkes Booth on April 14th, the milieu, the atmosphere of America was certainly quite dark. While the North was full of black flags and a cry of vengeance filled the air. Whitman avoids the extreme position of the radical Republicans who wanted vengeance against the South and portrays Lincoln's death as the beginning of a new era of national reconciliation and healing of the wounds of the Civil War. The poet has pictured Lincoln's death as the harbinger of a new era of peace and reconstruction. There is a touch of the convention of a pastoral elegy in the poem. Along with the sense of mourning, there is also a sense of awareness of the return of spring. The poet's complex awareness of a sense of loss and a sense of rebirth and reawakening is expressed by the juxtaposition of Venus in the western sky and the blooming of the lilacs in the dooryard. While Venus seems to be drooping in the western sky, the lilacs are in full bloom. In other words, nature is both in a mood of mourning and also undergoing a subtle, somewhat hidden process of awakening and rebirth. The poem is full of melancholy and anguish, but right from the beginning, the blooming of the lilacs also has been pointed by Walt Whitman. The title of the elegy is most appropriate, and the reader is able to see beyond the gloom and hopelessness. It is the idea of ever-returning spring that counterbalance the gloom and melancholy in the poem. In section 3 of the poem, which is quite important, the poet has described the old farmhouse where the bush stands. It is tall and has heart-shaped leaves. There are fragrant flowers and rich green leaves. There is also a songbird, thrush, that is singing a song. The thrush is alone like a hermit and is singing in darkness. The thrush is singing because it has intense pain in his heart and because it is unavoidable. It has to be noted that the poet identifies himself with the thrush. If the poet does not express his grief through his poem, he will die. He will not survive as a sane being. In section 6 of the poem, there is a detailed description of the coffin's journey through lanes, streets, and states of the Union. A large number of men and women watch the coffin travel through the states of the Union. There is a service in churches, and the organ bursts in a crescendo. As the coffin passes the poet, he places on it the lilac branch on his hand. That becomes the poet's tribute to the corpse carried in the coffin. In other words, Abraham Lincoln's death and martyrdom also contain the seed of spring, that is revival and resurgence of the nation. In section 11 of the poem, Whitman draws a glowing picture of the farms and homes. He also remembers the sinking sun that looks gorgeous. The grass and the green leaves are fresh and resplendent. The workers are returning home in dense, overcrowded cities. The poet seems to be as much preoccupied with Lincoln's death as with spring, the harbinger of new life. The poet has further described the scenery of his land with its lakes and forests, farms and fields, winds and storms. The land where men and women toil and extract the bounty of nature. It is in the midst of the manifold activities of life that he is able to have the sacred knowledge of death. The poet, however, is able to juxtapose life and death also. He is able to visualize life in death. He also pictures death as a deliverer, that is, as a goddess that liberates us from the tangles of life. Thereafter, in section 16, the song of death is pictured. Like a romantic poet, Whitman celebrates death as a deliverer, and he also wants to heal the wounds of the Civil War by affirming the positive qualities of Lincoln's martyrdom. The quest of the coffin across the length and breadth of the nation is also an attempt to transcend the horrors of the war. Yet, the poet is too much of a realist to forget completely the horrors of the same. In section 18, there is a vivid description of the horror of the war that has threatened the Union. All in all, the poem is as much a poem of mourning as it is a poem of life affirmation. Walt Whitman, well known for his rich use of symbolism in poetry to convey his thoughts, feelings and emotions, has employed three major symbols here: the star, the lilac and the bird. The symbols are interconnected and recurrent throughout the poem. Whitman has taken the symbols from the time of Lincoln's death. The spring and lilac are used to represent the cyclic nature of the season and the memory of Abraham Lincoln. The western star that appears in the evening marks the approaching night, is used by the poet as a symbol to indicate the death of the president. The darkness that follows. It also refers to Abraham Lincoln, who is like a guiding star to the people of America during the Civil War. The hermit, thrush, represents the voice of spirituality and the poet's soul singing. Lilacs, as suggested at the beginning of the poem and by the title of the poem, hold a special purpose throughout the poem. Lilacs here are represented as something that withstands and would continue to withstand with every passing spring. In this sense, they are representing the resemblance that Whitman will always hold regarding President Lincoln. The cliches of remembrance and a person are definitely quite worth recognizing here. Whitman writes, "Ever returning spring, Trinity sure to me you bring. Lilac blooming perennial and drooping star in the west. And thought of him I love." Phrases like ever returning spring and lilac blooming perennial serve to portray how lasting and effective his remembrance for President Lincoln will always be. The blooming lilacs in the dooryard of the old farming house that the narrator plucks in order to place it on the coffin of Abraham Lincoln represents the grief that the speaker feels after hearing the news of the president's death. The spring of lilac is a sign of mourning that the speaker shares with his nationals over the death of their beloved president. Strong imagery is used in the 11th stanza of the poem. In the stanza, the poet wonders which type of pictures should be hung on the walls of the grave of Abraham Lincoln. Then he decides to hang the pictures of all types of landscapes of America. Since the poem is a free verse, it does not follow any particular metrical pattern. Some of its stanzas have a fewer number of lines, while some have as many as 53. Some of its lines have 7 syllables, while others have up to 20 syllables. Implicitly, the poem also condemns the brutality and waste of war, and is notable for its use of pathetic fallacy in attributing grief to nature. Before the construction of the iconic Brooklyn Bridge, many New Yorkers who worked in Manhattan used to commute back home to Brooklyn every night using ferry boats. Walt Whitman uses the crisscrossing journey of the boat as a metaphor for a journey of the soul. Even as he stands in one place on the deck of a ferry crossing from Manhattan to Brooklyn, his soul extends forward and backward through the waters of time, and then snaps back into place like a slinky, or more appropriately, like the ebbing and flowing tides of the East River in New York. In the process, the poet traces an increasingly wide circle connecting himself to his fellow passengers, his fellow New Yorkers, his readers, and by the end, everyone. Sections 14 to 16 comprise a perspective of immortality. The poet remembers that one day, while he sat in the peaceful but unconscious scenery of my land, a cloud with a long black trail appeared and enveloped everything. Suddenly he knew death. He walked between the knowledge of death and the thought of death. Thus, the poem begins with an invocation to spring, continuous description of nature joining in the mourning over deaths of the great man. Description of the procession of mourners and flowers brought to deck the hearse. And there is a closing consolation that death is powerful over everything, and at the dead only full rest, and the realization that death is the entry to a higher life. Stating a few lines from the poem, when lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed, and the great star early drooped in the western sky in the night, I mourned, and yet shall mourn with ever-returning spring. Ever-returning spring, Trinity sure to me you bring, lilac blooming, perennial and drooping star in the west, and thought of him I love. Similarly, the 16th session is quite intriguing as well. Passing the visions, passing the night, passing unloosing the hold of my comrade's hands, passing the song of the hermit bird and the tallying song of my soul. Victorious song, death's outlet song, yet wearing ever-altering song. As low and wailing, yet clear the notes, rising and falling, flooding the night. Sadly sinking and fainting, as warning, and yet again bursting with joy. The last stanza, the 20th one, is quite well stated as well. Yet each to keep and all retrievements out of the night. The song, the wondrous chant of the grey-brown bird, and the tallying chant, the echo aroused in my soul, with the lustrous and drooping star with the countenance full of vow, with the holders holding my hand, nearing the call of the bird. Comrades mine and I in the midst, and their memory ever to keep, for the dead I loved so well. For the sweetest, wisest soul of all my days and lands, and this for his dear sake, lilac and star and bird twined with the chant of my soul, there in the fragrant pines and the cedars dusk and dim. Coming to the fourth important text of Walt Whitman, Passage to India, which was published in 1870. Walt Whitman included Passage to India in the 1871-72 edition of Leaves of Grass. It is a poem in which he is celebrating the achievements of engineers who have designed the Suez Canal, leading to the linking of Europe and Asia. The opening of the Suez Canal and the laying down of cables across the oceans have linked Europe, Asia, and North America. The poet is filled with joy and is in a mood to celebrate the present. It seems exciting that the past seems remote and shadowy. The poet can see the present growing out of the past. The crucial point is stressed by the poet in a memorable line. For what is the present after all but growths out of the past? The poem indicates the poet's sense of adventure and journey to the mystical land of the East, that is Asia. The journey is more than a physical one. It is a quest into the myths and fables of Asia and Africa. Science and technology developed in Europe and North America, which is as important, but equally are the myths and fables of Asia and Africa. There are temples dedicated to the sun. There are fables of pertaining to ancient gods and goddesses. There are lofty towers. There are towers red as roses. The poet celebrates all of them. He also celebrates a new religion. He celebrates engineers, architects, voyagers, and explorers. He projects a soaring vision of the oceans to be crossed, the distant brought near, the lands to be welded together. There is a hunger to colonize and conquer all lands and all people. Globalization seems to be the goal that Walt Whitman is projecting so ecstatically in Passage to India. He is making clear that the hunger to colonize and conquer all lands and all people is not purely from a selfish motive of trade and commerce. It is a spiritual imperative in order to justify God's name and the soul's immense possibilities of growth and perfection. The poet affirms that America's destiny would be fulfilled through colonization, conquest, and assimilation. A reader of Asia and Africa will, however, respond to Whitman's globalization with a fair degree of suspicion. If Whitman is a bard of American democracy, he has also traces of American love of global hegemony. The poet is able to picture in vivid detail the opening up of the vast land. He has glimpses of the great mountains, the Wind River, the Wasatch Mountains. He has also a sight of Monument Mountain and Eagle's Nest. Whitman's imagination is able to encompass almost the entire landscape of the continent. Thus, the exploration to the New World and into Asia occurs more or less simultaneously. The poet also recalls Christopher Columbus, a Genoese, whose daring adventure led to the discovery of the North American continent. He also says that the great explorer's dream is going to be realized soon. Passage to India is the ringing refrain that occurs at the beginning of the section 2, 3 and 4 of the poem. It seems to create a strong unity of impression of man's indomitable urge to conquer the vast, unending landmass in North America, Europe and Asia. It also signifies the overcoming of barriers and an affirmation of the oneness of mankind. Undoubtedly, Passage to India may not have the freshness of Song of Myself, nor the craftsmanship of Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking, or When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, but the thematic coherence and richness of imagery argue for its inclusion among Whitman's successful works. The form of the poem is that of a rhapsody in which images and motifs are repeated to lead the reader in one fairly clear direction. The temples of religions and the celestial towers of fables are pointing upwards toward heaven, emphasizing man's yearning for spiritual knowledge. The poets and religious philosophers of the past, eluding the hold of the known, dreamed conceptions of God which are incorporated in the legends, epics and Bibles of the ancient religions. As the poem closes, the lines become shorter and exclamations become more frequent. The poet urges his soul to stare in the trackless seas and the deep waters. They are safe, for he reminds his soul. Are they not all the seas of God? Imaginatively, on the spiritual journey upwards, the poet exhorts his soul in the last line of the poem. O Father, 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 sail. Since the material accomplishments of the past were limited, the upward movement of the old poets and prophets did not result in the accomplishment of Trinitas divine. But now that lands and people have been united, it is the whole globe as well as the individual soul that the upward spiral movement of the poet links with heaven. The paradise which is restored to man is within as well as on earth. In this state, life will be renewed, nature, man and God will be harmonized, and man will live at peace with himself and with the surrounding universe. Matching the progress of the speaker from singer to poet, the lines move from song to prophecy of the true Son of God, that man will regain the paradisal state. That though it may be deferred, the prophecy will be fulfilled. In the opening of the poem, the speaker admires the three technological achievements of the 19th century: the Suez Canal, the Pacific Railroad, and the Atlantic Cable, which are juxtaposed to the spiritual accomplishments of the poet. The material achievements of the past are not mentioned as in section 6 because the contrast evoked here is not between the past and the present, as the image of a projectile shows, but between the two kinds of achievements, material and spiritual, only one of which has been completed by the New World. In fact, the two achievements are characterized in two different planes of imagery, one horizontal and another vertical. The scientific achievements cover horizontal distances, the linking of east and west. The spiritual achievements of the past, and on the other hand, have been characterized on a vertical plane from the depths of soul to the heights of heaven. Section 1 in the speaker of the poem is singing of the great achievements of the present. He praises the ingenious for the strong yet light works. He says the present wonders outdo the ancient wonders. He praises the mighty railroads, the wires laid through the sea, and the Suez Canal. But then he cries out along with the soul about the past. He then speaks about the past in great detail. He calls it an abyss of shadows and sleepers, dark and unfathomable. The past has infinite greatness. The present is but an outgrowth of the past. In this section 1 alone, one may notice multiple poetic devices such as free verse, personification, and apostrophe. Section 13 talks about the speaker who is now ready to let go of the past. As said in the beginning, India is but a metaphor for the past. And now the reader is ready to go beyond all that is known, to go beyond the books into the unknown. The speaker is with the soul and soul is with him, and together they will venture only into the deepest of waters. No more mere lives of brutes, the blood of the speaker has awakened, boiling. He will rise the ship himself and everything to go to that unknown. The soul is brave, so is he, and they will sail farther and farther from the known, from safety. But they will be happy since all the seas are but seas of God. The long poem ends with the sentence, "O Father, 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 sail." The repetition tells the reader that the speaker and the soul are now on a journey to unreached places. The title suggests that the setting of the poem may be India, but it isn't India, and India is a metaphor. The poem is set throughout time, from the beginning of time to ancient history, to modern wonders, and to the unexplored future. The poem covers and traverses it all. The central idea of the poem is to take one on a path of past, of adventure, of reality, and ultimately to God. The tone of the poem varies, but it also maintains a trace of wonder. It is hopeful at times, dejected in others, hopeful at some, taking hope away at others. But in the end, all of this is replaced by a sense of exploration and a tone of hope and adventure. Passage to India can be approached on at least three levels: the philosophical, the political, and the aesthetic. Philosophically, the poem is thoroughly transcendental. The title suggests Whitman's long-time interest in the East and in mysticism. India represents the historical cradle of civilization and religion, and also the ultimate goal of the spiritual journey. Yet, as Whitman says at the beginning of the poem's last section, the goal is passage to more than India. Whitman's branch of mysticism was Western at its core, embracing the physical world as a vehicle to the spiritual. Hegelian in his conception of progress, Whitman sees an ongoing confrontation of opposites, physical and spiritual, ancient and modern, and life and death. A mediation between them and the creation of a new entity that enters into an endless cycle of creation. The physical is just as vital as is the spiritual to provide a pathway to the soul. The last major poem of Whitman's career, Passage to India, celebrates the achievement of material science and industry. But the poem just used these physical forms to accomplish what he termed the unfolding of cosmic purposes. In his later years, Whitman returned to the dominant theme of the early poems, the transcendental journey to the soul. With the world linked by the modern wonders of transportation and communication, Whitman envisioned a world ready for its final accomplishment, the creation of spiritual unity. To state a few lines from the poem, from the first section, singing my days, singing the great achievements of the present, singing the strong light works of ingenious. Our modern wonders, the antique ponderous seven out wide. In the old world, the east, the Suez Canal, the new by its mighty railroad spanned. The seas inlaid with eloquent, gentle wires. The past, the dark, unfathomed retrospect, the teeming gulf, the sleepers and the shadows. The past, the infinite greatness of the past. For what is the present after all but a growth out of the past? As a projectile, formed, impelled, passing a certain line, still keeps on, so the present, utterly formed, impelled by the past. The section 9 per se, passage, immediate passage, the blood burns in my veins. Away, O soul, hoist instantly the anchor. Cut the hawsers, haul out, shake out every sail. Have we not stood here like trees in the ground long enough? Have we not grovelled here long enough, eating and drinking like mere brutes? Have we not darkened and dazed ourselves with books long enough? To sum up, Leaves of Grass is the major work of Walt Whitman. Its first edition was published in 1855 and the last deathbed edition was published in 1891-92. While Song of Myself and Crossing Brooklyn Ferry reflect Walt Whitman's youthful exuberance and hope, When Lilacs in the Dooryard Bloomed and Passage to India are poems that reflect the poet's more mature vision. Belief in the individual is counterbalanced by Whitman's celebration of comradeship between man and man. There is evil in man and in society, but on the whole joy, order and harmony prevail in the cosmos.